All right, guys. Thanks for being here. This is History According to Hollywood
Woo!
with Dustin,
Woo!
Kyle, and Samuel. We have a guest today, guys. It's our first guest.
Really? I'm your first guest?
You're
Yeah.
our first guest, yeah.
That's amazing. I feel really honored.
We're honored to have you.
Are we? Are we though?
Yes.
Okay, apparently we
Well,
are.
thank you. Thank you.
I have to ask Kyle this, and then we'll talk. We'll get your introduction going here, Samuel. But Kyle, what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about. Wait. Is this is this week? So I can say it, right?
Yes, you
Or
can
do I
say
have-
it.
Okay.
Yes,
I
but you
just
have to
never
say
remember.
it. But you have to say it quietly.
Oh, that's right. So we're talking about All Quiet on the Western Front.
All quiet. All quiet on the Western Front. Which one? There's three of them.
Oh man, the newest one. The one where nothing's in English and you have to read your way through the movie.
I put in here that Netflix is just proves that they don't like anime from the very start because it automatically went to a dubbed instead of subbed, and I was like, "This is
Ugh,
wrong.
No.
This is not how you watch this movie.
No, you watch it in German and you read.
Gross.
That is how you watch the movie.
You read
You let the actors give you their performances in a foreign language. Come on, guys.
exactly." All right. So Samuel, we talked about bringing a guest on, and Kyle specifically said that a World War One movie would be your forte. You want to kind of talk about why that's the case and what makes you love World War One?
Oh, no. Yeah, that's totally correct. It's my forte because that's what I studied for like the latter half of my undergraduate, and then from the majority of my master's degree. World War One is just what I studied the most, and I did a 100-page thesis on humor in the First World War. And yeah, so I've just been taking courses and reading books and watching movies about World War One for the better part of like 4 years now. So that's kind of my area. I love, we say like we love studying this war, but it's like you love studying the war. I think it's basically it's not like a single event, but if you reference it as like a single event, the World War, it's like the most significant of this century or of last century and this century too. And I just love studying it. It's always so fascinating to me, just like the clash of the old world empires and the new world technology, and it's endlessly entertaining as a historian to keep diving into the different aspects of this history of this crazy conflict.
So you said you've been studying this for a while, and you've been watching a lot of movies about it. This came out in 22, so this is only a couple years ago.
Yeah.
What was your first reaction when you first saw it?
I actually watched this for the first time with Kyle,
Yeah, you did.
and then our other friend Anna Gunter,
In
who's
my
also a
apartment,
historian, in
On
Kyle's
my couch
apartment.
that was nicer than the rest of the apartment combined.
And this movie, we should say, is very an adaptation of a book, All Quiet on the Western Front, by Eric Maria Remarque. And that book came out in 1928 or 29, I think 29.
28. According to Wikipedia, 28.
Okay. Maybe English version 29. Maybe that's what I was thinking about. But in any case, so that came out late 20s, and since has basically been I don't know, maybe not most influential, but probably the most well-known, the most popular World War One piece of literature that came out of the war. So it's a work of historical fiction, and Remarque was part of the war and served in the German military. But the characters are, fictitious, but the work represents the frontline experience really well and reflects his experience and reflects the experience of many soldiers, and really struck a chord with many people on its really candid ability to show what it was like being a soldier, the inner thought process of a soldier, um, and just the way that soldiers were, even if they survived the war, they were destroyed by it. And so this book was hugely influential, and it's pretty clearly an anti-war piece because it shows war for what it really is per se. And so radical groups like the Nazis hated it because it was anti-war, and they burned it along with many other books. But around the world, people loved it, and people love the writing style, and it's a really well written book, and it's really great to read. And then in 1930, I don't know if Hollywood was Hollywood back then, but American filmmakers made a movie adaptation of it, which is mostly beat for beat what the book is, and it's really good. It's generally considered to be like one of the best films of the century, or at least the
Mhm.
first half of the century. 1930. It's there's no movie score, and it's all in English, but they got like a bunch of German veterans who were living in the United States to like come advise them on like the filmmaking process. So I thought that was really cool. And yeah, so it was a huge movie, and then somebody did a remake in '79, and it was kind of maybe a little more chopped up and made for TV, kind of a little lower budget, and then um, that was mostly British actors. I think Sir Ian Holm is in it, like Bilbo, and so it's very distracting when they're all like British actors. And so for a long time, we'd never had a German version of All Quiet on the Western Front, which was written by a German soldier. And so in 2022, everybody's very excited for this new German-made, German language version of All Quiet on the Western Front. And then to wrap all the way back around to my initial reaction is, I guess I was kind of taken aback by this movie because in terms of adaptation of the book, it isn't very good or
Mhm.
adequate. There's definitely some parts that are All Quiet on the Western Front, and some parts that like hint at All Quiet on the Western Front, but for the most part, it just wasn't really an adaptation of the book. And so I was a little taken aback by that. But overall, I thought the movie was good, and really hammered home a solid anti-war message, and the effects were awesome, and the cinematography was awesome, and the acting was awesome, and all that. And I've rewatched it, and I think I have more thoughts, but we can kind of wrap back around to that later, I think.
I too read the book. I actually read it. Well, I listened to the audiobook. I can read, but I listened to the audiobook
That's valid.
the week before the week that I watched it. And so it was still pretty fresh, and I thought it was interesting that the details that they got correct, or the details that were specifically taken from the book and put into the movie, but such big changes made at the
Mhm.
same time. It's like they got the little things right, and then just were very, very I don't want to say carefree. That's not the right word, but they made changes to things that impacted the story.
Yeah, when I watched it the first time, I was ready for it to be like basically a remake of the 1930 movie,
Mhm.
or not a remake, but like a reimagining. And when it wasn't, and it was so wildly different from this book that I think is both a good book and a really, really important part of the history of coping with World War One, that when it was so unlike it, I couldn't handle it, and I really didn't like the movie. And then the next day, I kind of was like, okay, it's fine. And then when I watched it again this time, knowing that it wasn't like the book, I thought, wow, this is a really, really powerful movie. It's not anything like its source material, but it's a really powerful movie.
And there are definitely instances where the movie can be better than the book. It doesn't have to follow it, beat by beat. Little side note, I texted Kyle whenever I finished the book, and I was like, sorry, spoiler alert, if you haven't read or watched the movie, did our main character die at the end of it? Like right at the very end? And he goes, yeah. No, I thought this was like verbatim taken from someone's experience during World War One. So I went through the entire novel thinking 100% of this actually happened until the
Oh,
very
dang.
end, and I was like, "Wait a minute! How did you write it if you're dead? That doesn't make any sense."
Well, the crazy thing is 100% of it probably did happen. It just probably didn't all happen to the author, like
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's a work of historical fiction, but it's so grounded in the experience of World War One that um, it, it 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 that's why it's so important today. That's why like it's maintained its relevancy, is because you can read that book and understand what a soldier was going through, because soldiers connected with it, and soldiers, it's like basically he was a soldier. It's based off his experiences, but every other soldier who fought in the war and read it basically put their stamp of approval on it, which explains its enduring relevancy, I guess.
Let's circle back to that because I kind of have a theory about the whole death at the end here.
Oh no, not Dustin's theories.
All right.
Oh Jesus.
Let's get to
wait.
it.
We're gonna start by talking about the end.
Yes, that's why I said we'll wrap back to it. We'll get back to it. Okay.
Okay.
It's funny you said that how important and influential 1930s All Quiet on the Western Front was. It won 2 Oscars, and this one actually won 4. And it was nominated for 9. The Oscars that it won included Best Cinematography, Best International Picture, Production Design. And I'm a little surprised by this, and I want to know your guys' opinion. It won Best Original Score.
Okay.
Did you guys like the score?
I didn't really notice the score, to be honest with you, which maybe means it's a good score. Like,
well,
maybe you're not supposed to like
the drone music in a World War One.
Yeah,
and
well,
it's the same. It's the same 3 notes over, like it's just repeated.
I think for me, it fit the emotional tone of the movie well enough that it like didn't register in my brain, if that makes sense. Like it felt like this is what this is, and I know that it's not at all like early 20th century sounds, but I'm like, yeah, this is what this would sound like in my head. Like if I were marching to my death in a trench, this is what would be playing in my head.
I was surprised that was one that it won. I thought it was actually something that kind of took me out of the film because again, and there's multiple musical cues throughout this that are just repeated too many times, and I think you guys couldn't change it up. You couldn't come up with something new here, but hey, maybe I'm in the minority there. I don't know.
It really won the Oscar for best score?
For best original score, yeah.
Wow. Okay. I actually liked the score. There's like I actually like they have that 3-beat, the boom boom boom, and it's like really metallic and kind of synthetic, and to me I thought like that's like their theme for the war, like that's like the conflict, and to me it kind of like I kind of liked it, and how it represents like this strange modern thing that these boys are being like thrown into, and it's a little abstract, a little industrial, a little scary.
Okay.
And there's other times when the score either heightening what's happening or kind of undercutting it in a really specific way. And the best example I have is after they've stolen the first goose, maybe like 30 or 40 minutes in, Kat and Paul have stolen the first goose, and they're all singing, right? They're like they've plucked it and they're eating it and they're all singing. They're singing a folk song. And the score is like super sad and foreboding over it. And to me, that was like a really good use of the score, how the score is like undercutting their happy moment with kind of the broader like tragedy of what's happening.
Okay.
So I don't know who else was nominated during that year. And so I can't say like it deserved to win, but honestly, I found the score to be pretty effective, I guess.
I don't think 22 was a very strong year. Hollywood was still reeling from COVID and the pandemic.
Wait, I got a list. Do we want to go through the list, or should we just?
That's fine. You already got it. Let's do it. Real quick.
There's All Quiet. There's Babylon, which I haven't seen. There's Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is
Haven't seen it.
really good. But I don't know about the score. I guess the score is okay. Banshees of Inisherin and The Fablemans.
So weak competition is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
In terms of
well,
score.
I mean 5 movies. Yeah, like there isn't like I don't think any of these are like Hans Zimmer or like John Williams or
Fun
something
fact:
like that.
Hans Zimmer wrote the score for Muppet Treasure Island. The man has depth.
I knew that, and it's a good score too.
It's so good.
That's
Do you
twice
reference
now.
Muppet Treasure Island every podcast?
No, that's a new
I was
reference.
about to say that Kyle has referenced that movie twice now.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember I don't remember what episode.
Every time we hang out, we reference it at some point.
It's secretly Kyle's favorite movie.
It's not secret.
It's not
it is
secret.
Kyle's favorite movie.
All right. Fox Puppies, starting it off. I was like, all right, this is already better than the original. I love it. No, but they're so cute, man. They're so cute. I don't know the relevance.
Relevance?
I don't know the relevance, but
I don't know the relevance either, brother.
thanks, Kyle.
I can tell you this movie was a relevation, though. That's for sure. Really.
So it's a silent open.
Mhm.
But 2 minutes and 20 seconds in, we have audio, so not all quiet. This poor bastard at the opening that ascends a trench while bodies around him are dropping like flies, and with undoubtedly wet trousers, he's blind firing towards the opposite trench. He's not gonna make it. He's not our main character. Get out of here.
You're like, who's this Heinrich kid?
First little thing here. So I wrote down I write down questions as I'm watching it. Why did they remove the coats and boots from the dead? And then it's kind of answered later on because they're going to reuse them. So that's kind of tracking. Are we accurate here? Were they actually reusing dead soldiers' uniforms and boots?
Yeah, for sure. At this point in the war, which it becomes clear it's like spring 1917, Germany's kind of starving for everything like food and material. So I guess being a little thrifty and reusing stuff is definitely something that happened. I can't say it happened like exactly how it did, but yeah, that's definitely something that's at least plausible and makes sense.
Yeah, Germany gets blockaded by the British Navy at the beginning of the war, and the blockade never goes away. And so, like Samuel said, I'll back him up. By 1917, things are bleak. Maybe not on the war front, but on the home front for Germany. Like, people are starving. Their resources are super slim. It ain't good.
Okay, so there's talks about taking Paris. How far away is Paris, and is it considered victory if it was ever reached?
How far is Paris is just kind of dependent on when and where on the front line you are, but around like the closest the Germans ever got is in 1914 at the Battle of the Marne, where they're about 30 miles from Paris, so they can like see Paris on their very far right wing. In 1917, you're like 90 to, like I guess the closest is going to be like 90 to 100 miles ish from Paris, so you're kind of far away. In contrast, like Berlin is like 500 miles away.
Okay.
But the front line itself, of the Western Front is 440 miles, reaching from the Belgian coast all the way to Switzerland. So it depends on where you are on that line, on how close Paris is. But Paris, obviously the capital of France, would be a really devastating loss for France. I don't think it would necessarily end the war because the government can just move. You can't really end the war without annihilating the enemy army. So,
however, it wouldn't have been the first time that a Germanic army took Paris, because about 40 years earlier, during the Franco-Prussian War, the Prussian army curb stomps the French army and takes
100%.
Paris and gives it back under the super harsh terms of the Prussian victory, and that helps unify Prussia and the other German states into the Germany that is now fighting in World War I. So there is precedence in French history that when Paris is threatened, the French get antsy, and that's true of all capitals everywhere. But in the German memory, it's the last time we were in Paris, we forced them to surrender. And so I'm sure the hope is that if by some act of God or guns we can get to Paris again, we can repeat history.
So there's a good scene here where Paul's uniform already has a name inside it. The sergeant says it was probably too small, tearing the tag away and tossing it on the floor, revealing a pile of name tags that have already been removed. You kind of talked about 1914. They were a lot closer than they were at the time this is taking place. What's happening in the war on the German side at this time? Do they know they're losing?
Well, I think I can take this one. So the movie states we're in like spring 1917. So we're about 2.5 full years into the war. Does that make sense? Wait, 15, 16. Yeah, we're about 2.5 full years into the war now. From the fall of from August 1914. And at this point, the war has kind of ground into a stalemate. And basically both sides are hurting a lot. The Allies more obviously so because they keep having disastrous campaigns.
Hmm.
1916 was a horrible year for them. 1917 is another horrible year for them. On the German side, they've kind of settled through the stalemate into the mode of defense. So they've decided no more big attacks. We're going to retreat a little bit. So they do a really big strategic withdrawal to something called the Hindenburg Line. They built up fortifications on a really long line behind their lines, and there's something called a salient, which is basically a bulge in the line that juts into like the French occupied territory. And so they reduce that salient by retreating back. And that also ruins the French and British plans, who they were going to kind of like pincer that salient. In any case, 1917, they're on the defensive. In February, they restart the unrestricted U-boat warfare
Hmm.
or submarine warfare against Allied shipping, hoping to choke Britain out of the war. In March, the Russian Empire, who the Germans are fighting in the east, undergoes a couple revolutions, and eventually by December will kind of be out of the war. They're going to sue for peace. So that kind of starts in March, and slowly there's a couple more offensives, but Russia's going to be knocked out of the war. So it's very clear that one whole side of the conflict is about to disappear. At the same time, so some of this stuff looks good for Germany, but at the same time, in April, the USA joins the war.
Hmm.
Um, and also in April, there's two major offensives: the Nivelle offensive, which the French don't get very far with, and the Arras offensive, which the British actually are pretty successful with. So all in all, I would say 1917 is decidedly mixed for Germany. Um, and I guess on the home front too, they've been starving due to the British blockade that Kyle talked about earlier. So they just got through the winter, which is a particularly terrible winter. And so the population is kind of starving. They're hurting for materials. They're surrounded, but there's some indications that things might work out for them if Russia's about to go out. 1917, they're thinking if the war lasts a couple more years, we might be able to knock out France and or Britain before the United States gets here.
Okay. So our cast of characters are not heading towards certain death that they know of. There's still hope that they are going to be part of the offensive or part of the pact that turns the tides and can actually win the war still.
Yeah, at this point, Germany's definitely not out of it. Like in their psyche, there's still a chance for them to win. But for now, on the Western Front, in anyway, it's more of a defensive war for them as they try to figure out other ways to win. And those other ways are the U-boat war, knocking out Russia, and coming up with new weapons.
So we're gonna see the trenches for the first time, and when thinking of trench warfare, we think of it happening in these large open fields. Is this the case, or is this just like basically every representation or production design of a World War One film that involves trenches all look fairly
Mhm.
similar? Is this accurate, or is this just kind of how what we call social memory?
It's actually fairly accurate because a majority of the trench lines are just wherever they kind of find themselves. The Germans especially would kind of retreated in 1914 and in 1917 would retreat to like higher ground, and so they're just on these random hillsides. It's all kind of arbitrary and random where they ended up.
Hmm.
And of course there's some front lines that'll go through cities, and all that, and there'll be some urban warfare, but those cities will be ground to a pulp by artillery, and then it'll end up just kind of looking like a field anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because cities will literally disappear from the map. But I would say this representation of the trench is very accurate, and the fields themselves are very accurate. They're all torn up from the shell fire, and a forest might have once been there, but now it's just a few stumps because they've all been shredded. So it does kind of start to look like, oh yeah, these all kind of look the same, but that's kind of the effect of artillery and fighting over this land for anything more than like a week. They'll all start
Okay.
to look like this just this hellscape.
Gotcha.
As
Okay.
as a fellow historian, though, Samuel, I did want to ask your opinion.
Yeah.
I have read that up until the spring offensive ish of 1918, that generally speaking, because the Germans were on the defensive, they had nicer, quote unquote, more furnished trenches than the French
hmm
and the British do. And you don't really see that in the movie. So, do you think that it's accurate enough, or do you think that it's one of those things where to bring the misery to like a full boil for the audience, that the producers, set designers, decided to like not depict the difference between like a defensive, well maintained trench and like an offensive slit in the ground, more or less?
Yeah, I don't know. It looks like the part of the trench that we see in the movie looks like it honestly looks kind of like a quiet sector on the front. And it kind of just looks like they've both been there for a while. So both lines of trenches kind of looked about equal, if that's what you were kind of getting at. And I think that's fine. I think in general, it's definitely true. The Germans had better trenches because they were more prepared to be there for longer because they were on the defensive, especially the trenches and the fortifications on the Hindenburg line. I don't know if that's exactly where we are. Um, so I don't think it's 100% necessary for the filmmakers to show, oh, the German trenches are so much better than the French, because they figured out how to make decent trenches too.
Sure, cool. Just wanted to pick your brain on it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So the boys are almost dead from the start.
The Western Front is not all quiet. Let me tell you that right now. It's-
Yeah, so like as they're marching to the line, mortars are gonna miss them by a little, like maybe 40 yards. Like they're pretty close, and we see later on new recruits that are supposed to arrive don't make it because the mortars do, in fact, reach close enough and take out basically an entire line of fresh new soldiers that are now just dead soldiers.
yeah, they get gassed
Ugh.
in a manufactory. I think
They also, yeah, I think isn't there two? Because there's the one where they see the half of a guy up in the tree.
there's the guy in the tree who got mortared, but then the company that they're looking for, like the 60 whatever new recruits, are all
Yes.
found dead from gas in a manufacturing
Okay.
building.
Okay, gotcha. Let's talk about the gas real quick here because I love the visual when they first put the mask on. You can see it bulge and retract as they breathe. I think it's just it's an aesthetically pleasing sight.
And it's so claustrophobic. Like it drives home like
For
how miserable
sure.
it has to be in that mask.
For sure. I realized throughout this, and I realized this while reading the book, when they said gas, I thought that meant like tear gas to drive them out of trenches. I did not realize that the gas itself was so toxic that like a single breath of it could kill you.
hmm
Because one of the things I wish they would have done, I wish they would have actually had a scene with the gas going off and you could have seen kind of the effects of people who don't have masks on and things like that, like to kind of drive that point home. But we just kind of see the aftermath with like what Kyle said with the new recruits in that room that took their mask off too early.
That's an interesting point because we do see them like early on put on the gas masks, but they're like, oh, there's no gas, we're fine, keep walking. And then later we see just the effects of the gas masks, like they took the masks off too early, ended up choking to death. I guess just in terms of gas, so the First World War sees like the first use of chemical weapons against combatant soldiers. And that's as the Western Front settles into a deadlock, into a stalemate. Armies start coming up with new ways of killing each other to hopefully break that stalemate. And so gas is just one of those. Tanks are another, improved airplanes are another. And so there's different types of gases. They experiment. There's chlorine gas, and there's like phosphorus gas, and there's what's the other one? Like mustard gas, which all have slightly different effects or slightly different like behaviors when it comes to the weight of the gas or like how wind affects them. And these chemical weapons would be implemented sometimes by especially early on, waiting for the wind to be about right and just opening up canisters of the gas and letting it waft in a massive wall towards the enemy.
Hmm.
Which when you hear descriptions of that, that'd be especially terrifying. As they see a wall of gas moving about as slow as a walking man, but just like inevitably towards them. And so like the first major use of gas is on Ypres, Belgium in 1915. The Germans unleashed that first, but they're not really prepared for it to be the success that it was. So they can't really capitalize on the breakthrough. And then both sides are really quick to start making gas masks to counteract the gas.
So the Germans used it first?
Yeah, the Germans used it first, and then very quickly both sides were using it, and very quickly the gas masks were created, and it's just another it's like play and counterplay, or however you might want to say that. And yeah, overall, like the effects of gas, if you didn't have a gas mask, is you'd inhale some mustard gas and then start dying from the inside and start drowning in your lungs, and then you die from that. Or you could lose your voice forever, or lose your eyesight, lose your smell, and just like have your entire like mouth and face system burned. So yeah, the gas can be really quite traumatic, and definitely a lot of first person accounts of people watching people die like that.
Think I'd rather be gunned down running into a trench, man.
I would
I'm
rather
not
be
gonna lie
gunned
to you.
down immediately. I would rather, yeah, that sounds terrible.
Like snipe me from the other trench, please. Like that'll be fine.
But
if I can put my request in.
gas or flamethrower?
Gas, I'd rather be burned to death for sure. The gas sounds way worse.
Bro, the World War I expert has spoken. I'm gonna back his play. I too would also be burned to death.
I don't know. I'd rather be burned from the outside than my lungs, like drowning from my lungs disintegrating from the inside.
Yeah.
But the scene where a bunch of recruits dies was kind of taken from the book, where they reference kids in a trench, or they were in a bunker and they took their gas masks off too soon, but didn't know that the gas kind of settles down low. So and sometimes you can't even see the gas, and you just have to hope it's not there. So that's kind of a reference to something that happened in the book. And one thing I didn't say is, in the beginning they would, they just open up massive canisters, but then later they would put gas in shells, and so they'd shoot it over at each other. And so they'd mix up, first there'd be a shrapnel shell, and then an explosive shell, and then a gas shell, and just kind of mix it up so the enemy wouldn't know what they're being hit with.
Speaking of sending strikes, there's a creeping barrage early on. So artillery that essentially just like kind of moves closer and closer as the enemy soldiers are following it. So
yeah, exactly.
You have to take cover, and you can't shoot at the soldiers that are, following the artillery. And this is where we're going to lose our first comrade of our group. And I'm
old glasses McGee.
Is the guy with glasses.
the token glasses wearer of the group.
Oh, I'm sorry. Air glasses McGee.
Yeah, I have a few names in here. One of them's not Andrew Garfield, because he looks a lot like him, but it's not him.
Yeah, is that Krupp? I think that's Krupp.
I think it is.
And then
not Andrew Garfield.
Not Andrew Garfield.
And then there's the blonde one.
I had Kat as almost Tom Hardy. Because they look they look pretty similar too.
Like if Jake Gyllenhaal and Tom Hardy had a baby, that'd be Kat. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a compliment. You can't take that the wrong way.
Kat's a handsome man, dude. He really is.
All right, here you go. You want your first? Oh gosh, I lost it. You want your first butcher? Here it is. Albrecht Scooch.
That was really impressive.
That's Kat. That's who plays Kat.
I'm not even gonna correct you. That you nailed it, man.
I really hope his last name is Scooch.
Back to the trenches real quick, or back to the front.
Back to the trenches, boys.
Okay, well, we're going back to the trenches. Let's go.
All right, we're just bouncing back and forth here.
That's
Cat's
fine.
gonna steal a duck.
A goose, you ignorant savage.
But I like to just say duck. All right. Yeah. Well, he almost gets shot for stealing it.
Yeah.
Yes. But
worth it.
worth it.
Yeah, man. If you're starving,
Oh yeah, no, that was
Is this a French farmer?
yes.
Okay.
Unless they happen to be in Belgium, but I think they're in France.
Okay. Afterwards, 3 French girls are gonna walk by in the distance, and the soldiers are gonna dock at them like kids seen a tiger for the first time. I did like this scene in the novel.
more like kids seeing a piece of cake for the first time. Am I
Yeah,
right?
this is a
Right.
scene. This is a scene from the movie that, like, hey, that's a All Quiet on the Western Front reference, and then it gets back to whatever it's doing.
Whatever.
Because so far, everything we've talked about in this movie has like only kind of vaguely referenced the book.
I feel like the movie should be called "Not Quiet on the Western Front."
So yeah,
All bleak on the Western Front.
All bleak, mildly loud on the Western Front.
But I feel like this would be my biggest complaint from of this movie is that in the novel there are moments of happiness, at least escape. There's moments like when they go and visit the French girls. They bring them bread and cigarettes and things like that, and they do what people their age do, and
scandals.
Scoodly poop. They scoodly poop for those not in the know.
Thanks, Kyle.
You're welcome.
They so there are moments like that, and like during his leave that's taken, and like they talked about how much they enjoy. Now the latrine again, the scene at the latrine, it is in the film, but it's not as like cheerful as it is in the book. I don't know, cheerful and All Quiet kind of sound like opposites, but you get the idea.
Perhaps
here.
a moment of levity.
Yes, thank you. But they're kind of taken out, and I don't know, whatever they were going for here, I guess they know what they're doing.
I mean, they won 4 Oscars, so
They did.
You know,
They did.
How many
obviously,
Oscars did Remark win?
0.
Lots of things to take in the background of scenes, especially whenever we're on the front, such as the planes flying overhead. And I'm assuming it's like anti-aircraft going off around them. Just a lot of different things. And like when they're scooping the water out of the trench with their helmets, just if you pay attention to the background, there's a lot of the times there's something going on that kind of adds to what's happening.
Or the scene where Paul, after his first battle, is recruited to take the dog tags off the deceased soldiers, and it zooms out, and there's like 100 soldiers doing the same thing.
Yeah.
All throughout the trench, just to show like how, and that's a very brief bombardment and how many people die in it.
Yeah. Quick side note, since we're talking about planes real quick. Sam, have you seen Wings?
Oh, Jesus.
And I haven't seen Wings, but it's on the list of bad movies I need to watch, I guess.
There you go.
I'm slowly working my way through all the classic World War I movies.
Yeah.
And so like the most recent 3 have been the 3 All Quiets. So now I get to move on to like something else. So should I put Wings on my list?
You should put Wings on your list. I will tell you, you
Hell
might
yeah.
want to mute. I muted my TV halfway through. Put on like a classical piano playlist or something.
Yeah, you think this movie uses the same audio track again and again. My brother, you have no idea.
It's in our Wings episode. It's like a loop, and it plays like 18 times too many. So
It's like a 2-hour and some change movie with like a 15-minute audio loop, something
I
like
don't
that.
remember
That's
exactly.
so funny, dude.
Like 10-minute audio. It's brutal, man.
That
Yes.
reminds me of Top Gun, where they play the same love song in like 5 different scenes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It is a fantastic movie when you consider it came out in, I think, 1927. It's the
Okay.
first Academy
Wow.
Award winner ever.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Okay.
And
yeah.
so, a very good movie, but yeah, I would mute it for part way through.
It has color pencil flames in it.
Yes. Who is this Eggman looking dude?
Oh yeah, Baron Mustache Von Evil Pants. Yes.
Dude, Mustache von Twirlingdorf.
I was watching this and I was like, what's the bad guy from Sonic? I looked it up and I was like, Eggman. Okay, Eggman is here.
So
Oh,
I
boy.
don't know Samuel's opinion on Count Evil Von Mustache Twirler, but
Yeah.
I know that in my World War I class I took eons ago. And Dr. Panzer at MSU will constantly say that part of the problem with American remembrance of World War One is that often you have to have like a proto-Nazi in the German army somewhere, because that is the connection Americans have drawn with Germany in World War II, is that it was meant to be. Like, Germans were always evil and they were always expansionists, and it just got worse. And this guy, it's ironic because it's a German movie and they don't normally do that, but this guy is your proto-Nazi. Like, found him. He's like Adolf before Adolf for reasons unexplained.
That is totally correct. This general, who I think is listed in the cast, is just General Friedrichs. He is not named during the movie. I was waiting for it this time around, where I was like, did they give this guy a name? Nah, he's literally just, just bad guy Von Bone to pick. Like, I don't know, man. He's not real. I guess he represents like a certain sentiment of German high command, where they're like, oh, we have to fight for every inch, every meter. In fact, I think he most represents Ludendorff maybe 3 months before the war ended.
Yeah, I got that vibe too.
Erich Ludendorff was, I think, he was basically second in command of the German army for the latter half of the war. And he kind of looks like Ludendorff too, the General von Mustache. And so he's kind of representing Ludendorff a little bit, but Ludendorff was, resigned at this point, because we're seeing this bad guy, like, what is it, November 8th, 9th?
Yeah, like the day before.
Yeah, so this is like day before the war ends. He, more like Kyle said, is like a proto-Nazi that they inserted into this movie. He kind of represents the post-war reaction, because at this point, everyone in the high command knows that the war is over and that they've lost, and they're suing for peace, and everybody on the home front knows that they're losing.
Well, the Kaiser abdicates, which they mention in the movie. Like, he is so hated that he just steps down. He's like, okay,
nobody in Germany is thinking we need to fight for every meter and we need to, go on the attack on the last day. So Eggman is honestly comical in a not good way, like in a way that actively harms the movie.
Yeah, and it's laughable how inaccurate he is in terms of, there's nobody who would have been left in a command position that high. Not saying there's not a crazy major out there, or like a wackadoo sergeant, but like, there's not a general in the German army that would be allowed to be like that at this point.
Is he the Ripper of this movie? Is he from Strangelove? Is he?
Maybe, man. He's the guy that, like, I don't know. For me, I don't know why he's necessary to the movie, because the tragedy...
He's the movie villain,
know? The tragedy of the movie right up until his appearance is that these are normal guys, and this is a war that has no quote-unquote bad guy, no righteous cause, especially by the end of it. It's just kids killing kids because old men decided that they needed to. And then this guy comes in, and suddenly there's some crazy guy like ordering people to their death, when that's not the real tragedy of World War One, and up to that point, it's not the real tragedy of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's not in the novel that way.
No, but and we'll talk about that more, like changes from the novel too. But it's just weird to me that the German filmmakers decided to put in German von Prussian bad guy.
Yeah, that's not a thing that'd be like an American thing. Like, if it was an American interpretation, I'd be like, yeah, that's par for the course.
Right.
Like, there's the proto-Nazi.
If it was an American interpretation like 20 years ago, like you're like, yeah, well, that's so American. And I think the weirdest thing about it is the distorted view of the last couple days that we get from this character being in there. Because it was quite literally the opposite, especially the French, who, are kind of hell-bent on revenge / getting their land back. But also surprisingly, the leader of the American forces, Pershing, he heard about the armistice and allegedly kind of blocked his troops from hearing about it so that they would keep fighting. And, all told, like in the last day, I think 10,000 people died. And in the last couple hours, Pershing himself is responsible for like 3,500 deaths, which he went to trial for afterwards, like after the war, where they're like, hey,
what
these
the
numbers,
hell was that?
These numbers are looking a little weird, John. Can you tell us about all these deaths in the last couple hours?
80 generals, and you're responsible for a third of the deaths on the last day.
Yeah, so to me, you're honestly kind of shocking that the German filmmakers have this German character in there because it does both a disservice to Germany and history and reality. So I don't know, really, really quite a shame.
I think if I remember the story right, the last known casualty of World War One is actually an American soldier who had just gotten there and was like, I don't have any glory. I barely got to the trench. And so he charges a German trench line with bayonet fixed and
in
fires.
The last minute.
Yeah, and fires enough bullets that they finally just shoot him out of desperation as they're screaming at him to like not do that. And he dies. They get his body, and then like 10 minutes later, it's 11 a.m. and the war is over.
That story is true. I don't recall that soldier's name. I think he was actually like demoted and then just wanted to like attack the enemy lines.
Something like that. I know that there's this weird American view because we hadn't been in the war very long of like we still have fighting spirit. Like, let's go get
like
those
we
trenches.
have to be important. Also, the last casualties are probably going to be somewhere in East Africa because they didn't get the news of the armistice until like day after. And
back to the movie here. I'm gonna say this wrong. Matthias Erzberger.
Matthias Erzberger. Yeah.
Daniel Bruhl's character, who we discussed before we started recording, is the German actor that Americans recognize.
You're like, yo, I've seen him.
Yeah, he's in Inglourious Bastards. He's in one of the Marvel movies. He's on his way to negotiate a ceasefire, and Eggman is pushing the offensive, sending more young men to their deaths in the trenches. Did this meeting between the French and Germans happen? And side note, I love the aesthetic of the two diverging train tracks being separated by only a thin tree line. It seems similar to what the trenches were like. But is this kind of how it went down?
In short, yes. Matthias Erzberger was basically the civilian representative of the German government sent to negotiate a peace settlement, and they met in basically Foch, Ferdinand Foch, the leader of the Allied forces. They met at his headquarters in Champagne, kind of a forest in France. And the interactions we see are almost precisely how it went down, of course in abbreviated form, but the demands that the French make: you have 72 hours to lay down all your arms, get out of France, get out of Belgium, hand over your navy. All that's pretty accurate. Of course, Erzberger is surprised at the severity of the terms, and the generals are annoyed at how it's basically a capitulation, which it definitely is. It's less so an armistice than it is a surrender, which are in technical terms like different things. But I would say this is actually really kind of the most accurate part of the movie in terms of representing what happened there.
And then that like incredibly brutal surrender term extrapolates itself in the Treaty of Versailles in the summer of 1919, which is just even worse. It keeps Germany from ever having an army again under the terms of the treaty. No air force, no navy. They have to give up things that they didn't even take in World War I that they had since the 1870s. And the Treaty of Versailles is actually one of the more direct reasons that the German government collapses, like within 10 years after the end of the war, is because the reparations and the cost is so steep that they can't deal with it. And then the global economy collapses and the Nazis rise. And then we all know what happens next.
I want to talk about this next scene. It's straight up just an action scene, but damn it, it's good. The soldiers are given the order to march, and it almost mirrors our opening scene. The battlefield's going to come to life as we focus on a terrified Paul dodging death as soldiers sprint to a line of machine gun fire. They're going to make it into the enemy trench. It's going to be Paul and Kat and obviously other German soldiers here. But the bolt action rifles used in the trench scenes bring such an intensity to what would normally just be fast paced, shoot, shoot, dead, dead. I love that there's those brief pauses while they're reloading their guns. I love that they peek out behind the trenches, that there's, splinters being shot into their eyes, and, there's it's grounded in reality here. There's no John Wick, kill everybody real fast moments in this. It's you're at any moment they could be killed at any time. They're in danger the entire time, and it doesn't even have to be the person, directly in front of them. And then when they finally, kill enough of the French enemies, they're going to go over and ransack their meal that they were having. Just again showing that these guys are starving because there's still a battle going on outside, and they're like, food. But then during this kind of calm down, everything's going a little bit slower. The table starts to rattle, rats disperse. They rush out and see a freaking tank. Please, someone elaborate on Le Tank here.
They see more than just one tank. There's a whole bunch.
There's a whole bunch of them, and bonus points for the shot of the tank running over a guy. I know that sounds horrible, but my gosh, I was like, oh, that is so gross and awesome. The horror fan in me was alive and well at that point.
Yeah, I can elaborate on Le Tank, unless Kyle, you want to take it first. You can
No, man, I know nothing about Le Tank. I will ask, are those tanks? They didn't look like Allied tanks.
Yeah, so those are the Saint Chamond tanks.
Okay.
Saint Chamond is like the name of the factory that they were designed and produced from. And these tanks are actually really funny. If you look at it like from the side view, you'll see basically a huge tractor tread that they smacked a tank on top of. So these are just like the angriest tractors you can possibly imagine. And you'll notice that it's like ridiculously long because they also wanted to put a French 75mm gun.
It does have a really big cannon for a World War I tank.
It's got the biggest, and the biggest until like the 40s, basically. They literally took a 75mm field gun and just like smacked it on the front of the tank.
Nice.
And then you can see these tanks are just so long, and these tanks are nothing like a modern tank, and they're like, by our standards, by everything, they're just like totally ridiculous, which is why they're so great and fun to look at. In reality, the Saint Chamond tanks were not very effective. They were very bad tanks, given their immense weight and length, and the relative shortness of their tank treads. They got stuck a lot, and
I was wondering about that.
They would tilt forward. So
could they like pole vault on the 75mm gun?
Exactly, like they would do that. So we see later a tank kind of dive into a trench and crush a guy, which is quite gruesome. But that tank is never, ever getting out of that trench.
That tank is still there to this day.
That tank is a goner. Okay. Kyle said they weren't like the Renault tank. So the Renault tank is like a two-person tank that head is on a 360 swivel, and that's going to be the basis for the modern tank. And so that's like the French, that's like their third tank design. The Saint Chamond tank that we see in this movie is actually an old design, so it's kind of weird that we see so many of them in 1918, but not a huge deal. There's only like 300 to 400 made, and they ended up just not being very effective as assault tanks. And so the tank scene starts off pretty strong because they go through a smoke screen. That's exactly what would happen. And the tanks start taking out machine gun emplacements, exactly what would happen, and the infantry come into support. So all that is pretty plausible.
Would it be able to drive over the tank? Or sorry, would it be able to drive over the trench like it does? Not the one that falls into the trench, but like driving straight across.
Yes, and there'd be areas where like they'd build bridges specifically for tanks, and then some tanks, less so the Saint Chamond because it was so heavy in the front, but they would be able to drive over French trenches because they're close together. When the Germans found out about the Saint Chamond, they actually widened their trenches so that that the Saint Germains would just fall straight in, and
Gotcha.
that's another reason why they aren't very successful in the field.
They do have machine guns in the side, though, so the first couple guys approaching the stranded tank are going to have a really bad afternoon.
It's true, yeah. And you see those machine guns like tear through half of a trench line. So, and that was the Germans in the scene. The Germans captured, the first line of the French defenses,
Mm-hmm.
and so the French going back over their own line, and you kind of see that push and pull in a battle. So that all seems pretty fair and accurate.
I was just going to add on to this scene saying that as if their day wasn't bad enough, here come more French soldiers with flamethrowers. Albert is the name of the character who, not Andrew Garfield.
Not Andrew Garfield.
Not Andrew Garfield, is his character name is Albert. He's killed by a man with a flamethrower as he is attempting to surrender, which you were shooting at the soldiers until they were right in front of you. So I don't really know if this is this supposed to be like the French, he should have taken him in as a prisoner. I don't know. What would be like, what would be normal in that situation? Were the French wrong for killing him?
I don't know. Yes and no. You're kind of in like the middle of a battle. It's not like the whole unit is surrendering.
Right.
And the French are kind of like advancing, like they're kind of in the middle of a fight. So
and he doesn't surrender until he runs out of bullets at his gun.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I don't know. I think that part is really just to show, like, for the first time we're getting this movie from the German perspective, and not a lot of World War I movies are from the perspective showing the French as kind of the enemies.
Yeah.
So I think this scene was kind of to set up a nice contrast between, excuse me, what the French are doing, and then we get to the crater scene later where Paul and kind of this French soldier, we humanize the French soldier. So I think it was kind of effective filmmaking to first have them gunning down his friend and then showing the French soldier.
With that scene, with the mortar scene, because it directly follows. If you haven't read the novel, do you think it lands the same?
Ooh, that's a great question, given that we've all read the novel.
Right.
It's in the book, it's very much Paul can't get away. Paul just has to kill the French soldier. In the movie, it kind of looks like Paul loses his last scrap of humanity because the French soldier doesn't have his rifle in his hand. And in theory, Paul could just scurry out of the crater and run to another crater, in theory. Instead, he charges across like 2 feet of water and savagely knifes this guy. And then yells at him to shut up and tries to strangle him to death, and then realizes what he's doing to another person.
Yeah.
Puts mud in his mouth.
He's got to come to Jesus moment after that. He's like, wait a minute.
And then tries to patch this guy whose lung he's just perforated more than a screen door. So I think it hits in the movie. I don't think it hits quite as hard because I think it's too fast to hit like the book scene does.
Yeah.
Because in the book scene, he has the whole night where he has to grapple with what he's done. And in my mind, I think it would take you that long after years of killing other people because that's just how the nature of war. In the movie, the fact that he goes from this man is the enemy, I'm going to slaughter him because that's what I do, to, oh my God, he's a person within like a millisecond is a little jarring. And it's like effective, but it's like, really? Would you? I'm not sure that guy'd still be alive. I think you'd have that realization after you had like cut him to the spine with your trench knife. Like,
I kind of agree with that because in the context of I think the scene on its own is pretty good, pretty effective.
Good. Yeah,
and once again, it's one of the few scenes in this movie that you're like, oh yeah, this is All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah,
I remember that book. So I think by itself, it's pretty good and effective. I think in the context of the movie, it's a little weird because he just killed like 3 people in the trench.
Oh yeah, with like no questions asked, and then shot like 3 more.
And then later in the movie, he goes and does the same thing. In the book, this is his first like close combat kill, and it really affects him. And then he goes back with his boys later, and they they talk about it and they kind of cope with it a little bit. And so the impact of that scene is stronger in the book. But if I can go back just to the tank scene as a whole, just real quick, for just a few history notes.
We don't allow those here. Sorry.
The scene is really cool, guys. But it's not It's not good history-wise. It's
As
really
it
cool. I
goes.
love
That's usually
watching
how
this
it
scene.
works.
It's cool. The tanks are cool. They're terrifying. But throughout this whole movie, they mention in the truck when they're moving up to the front, they're like, this is your Model 98 rifle. This is your Giver 98. Like, treat her like a lady, treat her like your mother, like whatever. It's kind of a funny joke. And then that's the only weapon you see for the rest of the movie. Everybody only has a standard issue rifle. And this scene, the tank scene, takes place in the last days of the war, 1918. We would have submachine guns. We would have light machine guns. We'd have different models of rifles. We'd have different types of grenades. We'd have all sorts of stuff that is just simply not present in this battle. Just the fact that they all have these rifles and they're shooting at the tanks is a little silly because it's 1918. We've seen these tanks for like a year and a half.
We know how to kill them.
We know that's not. Basically, what I'm getting at is you would not start firing at these tanks with your standard issue rifle. You would pull up any number of anti-tank things. First, you would shoot off flares, right? So your artillery could rain fire down on the tanks because the tanks are very vulnerable to artillery, right? Nobody in this movie shoots up a flare. Both sides could get light mortars, just like trench mortars that, would be about yay big. Basically flip them sideways and fire mortars at the trench or at the tank. And that would be an effective way of taking out a tank.
Damn.
Or they had, the tankgewehrs, which were basically the super rifles with like just a massive bullet, like a bullet the size of your forearm almost. That were just, a one shot, you blast a massive. Like, it's just a big gun. It's literally funny. Like you see them in museums all over, and it's just a big gun with a big bullet. And so they had tools to take out the tanks that we don't see in this scene.
How would someone fire one like that? Like, how would it not like break their shoulder in the process?
It would literally just kind of break your shoulder.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, like don't miss.
Yeah, like yeah, the recoil on those bad boys were pretty insane. But they were pretty effective because you just absolutely tear through a tank with them. We do see them take out a tank with hand grenades. So yeah, they have their bombs and they take out a tank. They take out the treads, so it's just dead in the water there. And then they stick grenades through the machine gun ports and blow up everyone inside. Inside the Saint Chamond tanks, in the middle is a massive engine. And then it's like a crew of 8 people that are around. There's navigator, there's people switching gears, there's people fixing the engine, there's a captain, there's 4 machine gunners, there's a main gunner. All these people doing their work. So a single grenade in there would shred a bunch of people to pieces. And a few people make it out and instantly get shot.
So, all right, here's another attempt. Tjaden? Did I say that right?
Tjaden, yeah.
Tjaden, hey. Yeah, so we just kind of I was just going to say that he's been shot above the knee, and then he's lying on the floor of the infirmary as doctors amputate on violently flailing patients. They're yelling to chloroform him. These infirmaries seem like hell.
Yeah. Samuel's like, yeah.
So
war is hell, dude. I don't tell you.
They're gonna get this is actually, I think it's early on in the novel, but it's kind of taken directly from the novel. There's the soldiers are arguing with the cook, saying like, give us double provisions because you made enough food for 150 men in a regiment and only 80 returned. So give us more food. And he's like, I can't give 80 people what was supposed to feed 150. And I was like, the rest are dead, dude. Give us the food.
Yeah. Like, hey, that's a reference to the book.
Right.
Is this all quiet on the Western Front?
This movie just got real quiet, guys. It's crazy.
So they're gonna take soup to Tjaden here, and he says, did you bring the cutlery? And they're like, yeah, of course we brought the cutlery. And then it just cuts to him stabbing himself repeatedly with a fork in the neck. That was unexpected.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Not taken from the novel. That was different.
Disturbing.
I also find it interesting that the very grizzled, at this point has seen everything soldier, immediately rips the fork out of the dude's neck, which is not what you're supposed to do. Just throwing that out there.
I wonder if they knew that.
I mean, he would have died anyway. Like that's not my point. He had turned his neck into like Thanksgiving dinner. But
it's like maybe just an impulse thing. You see your friend with a fork in their neck, and they're like, "Hold on a second, give me that." So arm assist.
I'm sorry, could you say that to me again?
The arm assist. Did I say it right?
The armistice.
The armistice.
Armistice.
There's a T snuck in there.
Armistice. Okay. All right.
But
Anyways.
I like armistice.
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 Nope. Armistice. There's no second T. There's one.
Wait, you
T.
just said there's another T.
No, armistice.
Say it again.
Repeat after me.
Meh.
Stis.
Stist.
Good. Now sound it all out.
Armistist.
There you go, buddy. Gold star.
Armist. I don't. What's the difference in what I was saying? Is that
Well, one's a word and one is a bunch of syllables that you put together.
which is a word? All right, moving on. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Why? What? Just to sound cool? Is that what we're doing here?
I mean, it's kind of random. That's when they kind of came to an agreement. Germans signed the armistice like 5:45, like 5 or 6 in the morning, on 11/11. So I guess the French were like, let's make this really poetic and wait 6 hours for the 11th hour. Also, it was so the French and Americans could keep attacking and killing people.
Eggman, Evil Man, is going to
General Mustache von Wiener Schnitzels. Yes.
Yeah. So it's stated that the lines will be accurately marked, meaning where the soldiers stand will be the lands that they retain. Was that how it was?
Sort of. The French said like whatever lines people are at, that's where we won't move beyond that. But at the same time, part of the armistice was telling Germany to, get out of France and Belgium. So I don't know that they definitely talked about that as if it was important, but I think in the post-war, peace conferences and the post-war armistice, it wasn't really important where people were because, any territory that Germany gained, quote unquote, from the war was, liberated. So I don't know. I think all of that was just kind of posturing and not really significant, I guess.
I guess the significance only kind of goes with the movie because this is why our evil general is going to say, you're going to march, you're going to attack right at the very end.
Yeah.
So it just kind of helps drive the plot of the film, but in real life, not really significant.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Another, what are we doing here? Paul and Kat returned to the farmer's property where they stole the goose.
On the last day of the war.
Oh yeah, Kat dies. They're hungry still. Dude.
I get that, but you're not going to starve to death in a day.
Is it because of hunger, or is it reliving, like you said, a moment of levity from earlier on?
I think it's both. I think also it's that we've made it to the last day, what could possibly go wrong thing, and then they find out very quickly.
They find out that little shit at the farm, dude, that little kid.
That little French child of the corn.
Yeah,
here.
Long story short, Kat has this who hates each other more relationship with the farmer and the farmer's son, and the farmer's son shoots Kat in the liver, and then just walks away. Just
Yeah, we don't know what happened to that kid.
I'm hoping he got hit by a bus. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I hope Kat killed him, but I only heard one gunshot.
I get defending your property, but there's defending your property, and then there's hunting this starving guy down into the woods for a goose, right? If he'd have killed Kat in the borders of his farm, honestly, I'd have been like, yeah, well, dude, I get that you're starving, but that's what you get for stealing other people's badly needed food. But this 14-year-old kid. But I also think it shows the trauma of war, though, because Paul and Kat have been harassing this farm once a week, once a month, whatever. And it's not the 21st century. The food on that farm keeps these people alive.
Yeah.
And so one goose is not life and death for that farm. But the 5 or 10 or however many that Kat and Paul have yeeted from them over the winter very well could be. And so it's an easy scene to dismiss if you're not thinking about it. But when you think deeply about it, you're potentially dooming these people in this farm to keep yourself alive. And that's just war in a nutshell,
I'd love to see an entire 90-minute movie where we find out the reason for this kid's hatred, and we see him training with his gun to go out and kill Kat as he pees against a tree. He must have really loved that goose, man. I put in here happy piano music with a half hour left in the movie is always a bad sign.
To me, the worst part about when he hunts Cat down is that it's just eggs this time. Like it's
Right.
literally 2 eggs. They get away with 2 eggs, and this
Also,
kid
Paul
hunts them
stole
down.
the eggs.
And Paul stole it. But yeah, I don't.
Anyway,
But to be
The-
fair, you also have to remember this kid is French, and these German soldiers have been occupying the territory for going on 2 years probably at this point. So
after carrying Cat however far, the medic pronounces him dead on the scene. The lines are repeated from the novel. I was just talking to him 10 minutes ago. He's just unconscious. But the scenario has changed. It's a Splinter that punctures his somewhere in his head or the back of his head or something.
yeah.
In the novel, and here he's just shot by a kid.
And they're both tragic in their own way, because in the novel it's like the sheer randomness and instant like delivery of death in modern war, and then in the book it's the like somebody
Yeah, little piece of shit.
you know your brother in arms is dying, like that, but what are you gonna do? Like
Right.
You can't just leave him in the forest. But I think for me the hardest part of that scene isn't even Cat dying on the last day of the war, as bad as that is. It's the callousness that the medic talks to Paul about it, where he's like, you could have saved your effort, he's dead. Like, he doesn't say, I'm so sorry, he passed away, he didn't make it. He literally tells him, you could have saved your effort, he's dead.
So they're gonna order the attack to take back Latier,
Dumb.
And execute the man who
Stupid.
protest, which is
they protest and they get shot for it.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Which we've already kind of discussed that. And I asked you, any real offensive in the last remaining hours of the war, and you basically said, but for the other side.
No German army would have done
The Germans
this.
don't have enough soldiers left to like think about a last minute offensive, from my understanding. Like there's nothing left. Like Germany's just kind of a shell of what it was at this point in the war.
So while the French drink and celebrate their victories, here come the German soldiers with their final march toward enemy trenches. We're gonna get quite a battle here, quite a fight. Paul is going to be accompanied by somebody who is like he's like a new recruit. He's in his first day, and he is completely useless. He doesn't do anything. He's just trying to get home.
Me too, dude. Me too.
He mirrors Paul at the beginning of the movie. So Paul's finally going to be killed when he's stabbed with the bayonet from behind. I like that we don't see any details.
As the whistle goes, like as it rings 11, he gets stabbed, which
So he sees the end of the war. He comes out of the trench, not out of the trench. He comes out of the bunker, and he sees the end of the war as he's breathing his last breaths. But I like that it's a soldier without a face. It's a uniform. It's a silhouette. He gets stabbed from behind. He doesn't see it, and the soldier that he's fighting with just kind of leaves him. The one that he does see the face of, and he has
the soldier that he was fighting with. They had stopped fighting, and it's brief.
Yeah,
but they had kind of like the soldier he's fighting has a gun. He could kill him. He doesn't. Paul only has a rock. You're like, oh, humanity's going to win out. They're realizing that it's the last 5 seconds. Stab. Oh, shit, never mind. Okay.
Yeah. So let's get to my theory here real quick.
I don't know why Renault in the back of the bunker was so pissy, but man, he was not having it. He was like, you were not seeing the end of the war, dude.
It's mentioned in the novel, no other generations don't understand. The generation that comes before us, the generation that comes after us. This war has ruined an entire generation of men. Is this symbolic of, even if he would survive, part of him never would have left the battlefield?
I guess a little bit. I guess one of my critiques when it comes to changes between book and movie is how the movie doesn't really emphasize that aspect of the book.
Mm-hmm.
One of the core themes of the book is how these men are changed by the war and how they're destroyed by the war, and that is illuminated by the scenes where Paul goes home on leave.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes home and he's basically a stranger in his own home. His mother doesn't understand what he's going through. His sister doesn't understand. his father cares about different things, and like all the people on the home front are like, oh, you don't understand like the real war, the whole picture. So he kind of feels alienated from the home front. He feels alienated from the life that he once lived, and he's realizing that, oh, like this war has destroyed me so much so that I can only fit in back on the front. And he's like, I'm gonna leave early. I'm gonna leave, my home early and like run back to the front because that's the only place he can now fit in. And so that's what I think when it comes to changes, the movie really loses. And I guess when it comes to this moment of Paul dying at the very last second of the war, for some people, I think that'll be really effective and like, oh, this is the tragedy of the war. He's dying at the last moment. The war is hell. But I think for me, it's kind of cartoonish in Hollywood, even though this isn't really made by Hollywood per se. But it's just like, oh wow, I'm watching a movie. He died in the last second. To me, it's a little cheesy. And so for me, it kind of ruined that ending for me just a little bit.
I think the movie is really good in a lot of ways. I think one thing that we still struggle to grapple with post World War II is that World War II is a really bad deal. But World War I rewrote the trajectory of European history, like indefinably so. You go from a period of, with the exception of the Franco-Prussian War and the Crimean War, like peace since Napoleon. So 100 years of generalized peace and growth and, like early 20th century liberalism to total modern warfare, and then to economic free fall and an entire generation of men like wiped from the face of the earth, not to mention the collapse of 4 major empires and the like withered remains of 2 more. So just even culturally, what comes out of the post World War I era, like the films and the books and whatever, World War II was bad, but in World War II, there's a bad guy. The bad guys are the Nazis and the Empire of Japan. Like, they're just human rights abuse manifestos, In World War I, the bad guy is the war. Like, that's the evil is just the other dude who was also told to man his trench. And I think that's there in this movie, but I still don't think the significance of just the sheer uselessness of World War I can ever really hit home. Just because, like, it's hard to fathom now. Like, it's hard to fathom that big of a war for absolutely no reason whatsoever except for national pride.
Let me tie your guys' critiques together here with something that I think I realized watching this, and you guys just talking kind of, brought it full circle. You talked about how it seems kind of cartoonish that he dies in the last seconds of the war. I think the problem here is it makes it Paul's tragedy, not the war's tragedy. And it kind of makes it to where, yes, we're living through this character, but you kind of lose it right at the end and make it about one soldier instead of the entire war. Which I felt like the novel did a better job of.
Yeah. Well, and in the novel, isn't he just like killed by like an artillery shell or something?
It's just completely
like
random,
out of left field. Yeah, I mean, I think even if they had wanted it to be in the last minute, if they'd have done, as Samuel pointed out, the historically accurate thing, and the French had been on the offensive, and Paul, even if he dies the same way, but the German army isn't attacking, I really think the cartoonish proto-Nazi general launching a final suicide attack like bleeds the significance of the last minute deaths of the war away. Because of course they kill them because they're attacking. You know what I mean? Like right. I'd shoot you too.
It kind of ruins the movie, honestly.
Come into my trench 5 minutes before the end of the war and expect me not to shoot you. What are you doing? So I think that if it had been a French counteroffensive, or even if it had been something like sheerly on accident, like, I don't know, a dud explodes, like a grenade, like a random grenade goes off.
Can you imagine how mad people would be?
Yeah, I know, but that would have been more. That would have been more true to like the experience of war than, especially World War I. So I agree with you that it does, in the last minute of a movie that is not at all Paul's war, makes it Paul's war, and there's no reason for it.
So speaking of like comparisons between the novel and the film, what were some of your biggest takeaways? The biggest differences? What did you notice?
while watching the movie, the question that I'm asking myself is, okay, what is worth getting annoyed at? Like changes from the book. It's a fictional book. Like
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not like it's a memoir.
Yeah, and I guess the other question is like, what are you trying to get out of this adaptation, or like
Mhm.
what is adaptation? Which I can't really answer that. Nobody can answer that here, but I guess I'm not personally annoyed at like any random change from the book. Like if you change it and it serves the story better and it highlights the themes better, great. If it's like a little detail change, I don't care about that. Like the difference in Cat dying,
Mhm.
one way or another, that doesn't really change for me. It's the changes and usually the exclusions that come from book to movie where you lose information, themes, and meaning. Um, and so I guess the biggest gripe I have with this movie is how little of All Quiet on the Western Front there is in this movie.
Mhm.
Um, and that's like there's no Kentorek, which is their teacher. There's no second meeting with this teacher. There's no returning to the home front, which is, in my opinion, the crucial part of the book, is him returning on leave.
I think it's the longest chapter.
I think it's 2 full chapters dedicated to
Mhm.
to going on leave, being on leave, and coming back. And to me, that's the core of the book, and it's that difference between the home front. You see how he's been destroyed by the war because he gets to go home for a little bit and then he returns. Um, and I think it hurts the movie ultimately because it kind of simplifies the message of the movie. The movie is clearly anti-war, but it's not super nuanced in the way it's saying it. It's like war is hell. Okay. We've heard that before. I would have maybe appreciated something that went further than the other movie adaptations, something
Mhm.
that goes further than the book to kind of draw out and make the themes of the book a little more obvious. Because I think this movie, in the changes that it makes, loses a lot of meaning and loses a lot of themes. Um, and what they add is, kind of the wider context of what's happening in the war. So they add the armistice and they add, the general. And while that adds something, and I think that something is good, if you wanted to make a movie about the armistice, go make that movie. If you wanted to make a movie about Erzberger, go make that movie. That's a really great movie that is just waiting to be made. If you want to
Mhm.
make a movie about, crazy Prussian generals, all right, like the Kaiser did toy with the idea of sending the Navy on a death charge, and that's what kind of triggers a revolution in Germany, from among soldiers and workers in the Navy. If you want to make that kind of movie, go make that, but don't call it All Quiet on the Western Front if you're not going to, you know, uh, stay truthful to the themes and meaning of the original book. And once again, I guess it's important to emphasize how significant this book is, how influential it is, and just like its staying power in history. And I think that's something to take serious that I think this movie just kind of didn't.
Don't make Star Trek and then try to call it Star Wars. Like if
It's yeah. I think that's all I'll say in terms of like the adaptation. I think that's the gist of it.
All right, guys. Are we doing a review or a bit of nope? Bit is dope. Bit
I
is
think
dope. Bit is nope.
I think biggest dope, biggest nope. But Samuel and I can
What
do history, and you can do movie. Oh
I
yeah,
don't
we
know
need to
how.
explain this to Samuel.
Oh
Oh,
yeah. Tell me about this.
so
So
yeah.
we
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, okay. So it's exactly how it sounds. Bit is dope. Bit is nope is your favorite thing of the movie. If you're talking about historic. If you're going to do the history side of it, then I guess it'd be what they got the most correct and what they got the
Okay.
least correct.
Or what you
Um,
thought was like the most powerful versus the least power.
Okay.
The kicker though is that we each only get roughly 30 seconds to do it. Like
Yeah.
normally we do it within a minute, but since there's 3 of us, we'll do it within 90 seconds.
We'll do 90 seconds, but the takeaways you only get about 30 seconds now. If I talk for a minute, then you guys get 15 each.
And Dustin likes to babble, so the odds of you and me getting like 23 and a half seconds each are pretty
That's
pretty
okay.
high.
I'm already thinking about it. Do we do like a number rating? Do you guys still do that or no?
No.
Oh yeah, we'll do that afterwards. And we meant to do
Oh,
that
okay,
on
work.
Django. We didn't do it on Django.
We were too busy talking about who the most racist characters in Django were.
Yeah, we haven't released that one yet, but it has a racism tier list.
That's funny. I can't wait to listen to that one.
I'll start us off. Let's do I'll start, then Kyle, and then Samuel. Okay, I'll talk about the movie. You guys talk about the history. Or whatever you want to do. I don't care. Make it your own. Go. Biggest dope by far, the scene where they storm the trench and the tank arrives and the flamethrower. I love that scene from start to finish. I thought that was incredible. Biggest nope. You know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna say the score. It took me out of it multiple times. I don't mind the drone, but the fact that they used the same drone beats so many times over and over, I wasn't a fan. All right, y'all turn.
All right. For me, biggest dope. This is gonna sound so morbid. All of the character deaths.
Nice.
Just because they're so correct, if that makes sense. Like they're so perfectly random and awful and visceral, and nobody dies for any reason in this movie. And I love that they didn't try to justify it. Biggest nope. Freaking twirly General Mustache Von Egghead Buren. What are you doing in my really good World War I movie? Please get out of it. All right, Samuel.
Okay, biggest dope, and this will kind of sound weird given what I just said about the adaptation, but my biggest dope is honestly the train car scenes and how well that's represented, and just kind of how good those scenes are. And it kind of makes me wish that they had just done that movie instead of All Quiet on the Western Front. Biggest nope. I'm gonna agree with Kyle that it's definitely villain Von Mustache.
He's useless. Why is he there?
And the last minute German attacks that are just straight credulity. So, yeah, that's just silly in Hollywood.
We did it, boys. So proud
yeah,
of us.
we did.
Woo.
Just a quick side note here. Something that I learned. It's interesting that we've talked about this quite a few times now, but it's interesting that they put the proto-Nazi in this because this book and film was banned by the Nazi Party during their rise. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they burned the book in their book burning rallies.
Yeah,
so,
and they banned the American film from being seen.
Very interesting. Okay, guys. Whoever wants to start, man, give me a number. Give me just give me a number. What do you
Like
think?
your waistline?
Out of 10.
Or
No.
Like how
That
pretty
does not-
Samuel is, or what are we doing?
Kyle's a
here?
10 out of 10 for sure.
Oh,
Damn
no.
straight. My waistline's a 10 out of 10 too. Is the problem?
I'm at Max. What's your waistline? Max.
Max.
That's not a number. Yes.
Grande,
Okay.
my man.
I've got 3 different ratings for this movie. Do you guys want to hear them?
Let's do
Sure.
it.
Okay, as a movie, I give it 7 out of 10.
Okay.
Okay.
As history, I give it 6 out of 10.
Sure.
As adaptation, I give it 2 out of 10. I'll give it a couple points.
Give it 2 out of 10 adaptation.
Yeah,
Like I said earlier,
adaptation.
there were certain details that I was like, I know that's straight from the novel, and I was like, that's really neat. And then but like the story wise, it seems like they just kind of missed it. Like you said, this doesn't feel. You nailed it when you were like, just don't call it All Quiet on the Western Front. Like just make your own movie.
Ode to trench warfare, like whatever.
Yeah.
But
It seems in the end, it just kind of seems a disingenuous attempt at making an all quiet movie.
yeah.
They could have called it Trenchies with the Frenchies.
Trench fries, baby.
Trench fries.
All right.
Referring to the flamethrower.
Yo, how
Yeah.
much you trench?
Yeah, man. Tanks, trenches, and automobiles.
Which actually was starring John Candy.
Yeah, crazy. So I didn't read the book recently enough to give it an adaptation score. I agree with Samuel though. It's not a good adaptation. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 as well for the movie, but the problem is it's one of those movies that for me personally is like almost a 9. Like if the crazy German general doesn't exist, I might be tempted to give it a 9.
He ruins it.
He literally takes that much away
He ruins
from the power of the movie. It's still a good movie, even with him in it, but it could be a great movie. It's like we talked about Troy is almost the greatest like epic action movie that's ever existed, but it's not. That's how I feel about this movie. It's almost one of the greatest World War I movies that's ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
And because of him and the choices the director and the writers made to put him in it, they robbed themselves of that. Historically, I will defer to Samuel because he knows far more about World War One than I do, and I don't have a
What'd I
reason.
say?
6.
I said 6.
And I don't have a good rebuttal for or against that. So 6.
So my historical rating will actually be a 7. I'm just kidding. No.
Of course it will.
Hey man, it's all opinion.
Yeah, whatever I remember from Wings, and that was about it. I'm gonna give it. Okay, so you guys both said 7. I'm gonna just stick with it. It's a 7 because I want to give it more, but I feel like, and I think the German general bothers you guys more than me because I don't know this stuff. Now that you've explained it and you said that it's basically backwards, like that is a dumb decision. I'm actually more bothered by the farm and the goose than I am the German general, but that's just my opinion. And I want to say bleat for bleat's sake. At certain points where I'm like, I understand it needed those moments of levity to make the hard parts harder.
Well, like what's tragedy without levity, right?
Exactly. And if everything's tragic from start to finish and everything just keeps getting more and more tragic, you just get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm just watching things fall apart. Like, who honestly watching this movie was like, oh yeah, Paul's gonna survive, Paul's gonna make it. Everyone knows he's gonna die. If he'd made it to the freaking train, the train would have fallen off the tracks and he would have drowned or something. I don't know. Like, just the way the movie went, you knew early on, you're like, all of these guys are gonna die. I mean, that sounds morbid, but it's just the way the movie went, and so it's like, give me a reason to watch it again. Give me something to go back to, other than seeing that guy get ran over by the tank. But yeah, I'll give it a 7.
That's a good point. If I can just interject for just 2 seconds, I think that's another way it kind of fails as an adaptation, is like it lacks the charm and humor of the book, like nobody's business, really.
And Samuel has now moved it to a 1 out of 10 in adaptation.
It's going down a 1 out of 10, guys.
All right. Well, I did not read this novel.
Wait. Yeah, you read it. What's your adaptation score?
Oh, adaptation score. I was gonna say I did not read this in high school. There's no way I would have made it through this in high school. My brain would not focus for that long. Adaptation wise, yeah, like I said, the details they got right, and at some points the details I was like, oh, that's nice, but like, okay, I think the scene that I was like, why are you changing this, is the scene with the French girls that go by, because that's not how they have to cross the river. That multiple ones go to see them. Yeah. And they bring them back and they're all smelling the clothing or whatever he brings back from her.
Scarf.
They could have had a moment to where, like, they're all hanging out with the girls and like things go to, oh crap, we have to go back. And I feel like that's what it was in the novel, and it's like that would have been so much more effective. You just changed it. And why? What benefit did you get from it?
Yeah. Bleak for bleak's sake, right?
Weird that our main character does not have that experience that could have been, interesting.
Instead it's blonde dude.
I don't remember. It's blonde.
Yeah.
Was he Hans? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's in German, man.
We don't know these boys. That's another thing about this movie.
Yes.
We don't know these boys.
Yes.
We remember Paul and Kat. Everyone else, we don't know these boys like we do in the other movies, in the other adaptations, or of course in the book.
Yeah, just certain parts that were missed. I guess I would just say, if I just give it a number, I just like maybe a 5 out of 10, right around there. Four.
You're so generous, dude. You're throwing out points.
Man, I'll tell you what. Yeah, I'll give it a 4. A 4. Let's do that.
All right.
Immediately talks him down from the ledge. You don't want to do that, man. Think about what you did.
It was World War I. They got that part right. There's 1 point. They were German. There's 2 points.
His name was Paul. That's
process.
3 points.
Oh my god!
I think his name was Paul. I thought it was Fritz for half the movie, so I don't know. I'm not good
and
with
the other
names.
guy's name was Kat. There's your 4 points.
All right, guys. Well, Samuel, thanks for coming on here, man. We really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh! Thanks for inviting me. This has been so much fun. When's the next World War I movie?
It's a great question. Probably after you get back from New Mexico.
Can we do Lawrence of Arabia? I want to do Lawrence of Arabia.
I've never seen it, so yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
But yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
We've had a great time. Kyle, what are we doing next week? when Samuel's heading off to work, what are we going to be working on?
A number worn by a black dude swinging a stick.
There we go. There we go. And hopefully there will be hopefully there's no white dudes swinging sticks at the black dude.
At the black dude. No, we did that already. That's Selma. That was season 1.
Come on, America. We can do this.
Stop swinging sticks at each other.
So, all right. Well, we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. All right, guys. I'm going to need us to be all quiet for a moment. We've been talking for a little too long.
Is this better?
Yes, Kyle.
Better?
Actually,
Okay.
Kyle, do you see the little thing that has a microphone and has a line through it? Can you click that button
I hate you.
for just a little bit?
I hate you.
I'm
How
just kidding.
dare you?